Okay, let's move now from some gloomy years in the life of Adoniram Judson and the beginning of the modern mission movement to some years that were a little more productive. Let me remind you of a document that the university owns here, really as a gift from Rosalie Hall Hunt. In that period of discouragement and depression, Judson is parting with all of his earthly possessions. He doesn't want he becomes very ascetic, very monkish. And if you had your glasses on and could read that, it would say something like, I, Adoniram Judson, a Baptist missionary in Maulmain. And in this document, he gives a piece of property to his sister for $1. He wants to be shed of any earthly things. And so this is kind of a precious document and he describes the property on here in his handwriting. It goes from this road to this road and from this man's property to this man's property. And he gives it away to his sister because he wants to be bound by nothing that's material or earthly. And it's a treasure here in our Judson collection at the university. But out of that period of just struggle and pain comes 20 years of successes. So I want to talk about those 20 years of successes that begin now. We have moved the headquarters from Rangoon to Ava. That only lasted short time because they're in prison in Ava, and then they decide to move to Maulmain. So Maulmain becomes the headquarters. Judson is in discouragement and depression, but there's some families that have come to help him out. Let me mention the Boardmans and the Wades specifically. Those are the two missionary families that will really make a significant difference. Price stays up here in Ava after the war ends. Price had a very interesting career. He made a mistake in operating on a Burmese woman's cataract, and she went blind. Now remember, Price's wife died 5 months after he got here. So he married that Burmese woman, the blind lady. That gave him some credibility with the government because at least he married a Burmese woman. They thought that was good. And so he actually resigns from the mission board and goes to work for the Burmese government / the British government. And he only lasts 2 more years because he's now going to die of tuberculosis. But he kind of fades out of the picture. So Price is now gone. And we are over here with the Huffs. Huffs are still there doing the printing, and the Wades and the Boardmans are the main sources of encouragement. While Judson is out on the edge of the property trying to decide whether to die and to crawl into that cave, the Boardmans do something interesting. The Boardmans go down here to Tavoy and encounter a group of Burmese citizens named the Karens, K-A-R-E-N-S, Karens. You would pronounce that probably with a different accent when you saw it in print. The Karens. Now the Karens are not Buddhist people. The Karens are animistic people. They're not the people in power and control. The Burmese, the Burmans, is the biggest cultural group, the biggest ethnic group are the Burmans. So we're speaking Burmese language, and the government is controlled by the Burmese. But there's about 20 different smaller ethnic groups that are around, and they're mainly animistic, and they are mainly non-Buddhist. And they encounter the Karens down here, mainly in Tavoy. And the Karens are fascinated by the message that the Boardmans bring. The Karens had a legend that someday the white man will come from the ship with the book and bring us the truth. Boardman shows up. White guy. He gets there via ship. And he's carrying the book. And they are fascinated by the gospel of Jesus Christ. And the Koreans start following the teachings of Boardman immediately. Boardman is assigned to only do Korean ministry. He's not to be dealing with the Burmese or any of the other groups. And Boardman has amazing success numerically far beyond what Judson does. Though again, what happens, disease, Boardman lasts about 5 years and dies. But he leaves a widow. But we're starting to see things happen. We're starting to see baptisms happen. In 1830, there were like 47 baptisms. Help me out. In 1831, how many do I have down here? 217 baptisms. 1832, how many baptisms? 143 baptisms happening. Now that's a significant. Remember, when the war started, the one church here in Rangoon had 18 baptized members. Now we're baptizing over 200 people a year, and this is only 7 years later. Something's happening. Well, it's the Koreans. The Koreans are coming to the gospel and coming to the message of Boardman significantly. When Boardman dies, Adoniram then starts making the trips in to speak to the Koreans. He makes 5 trips inland from Moulmein and from Tavoy to speak, to do the preaching, to deliver the tracts and all that kind of thing to the Koreans. And then Judson starts seeing the significance of the Korean movement. Another interesting project they got the Koreans going now. Another interesting project in this section of when we're having some success, they decide that they'll go back to Rangoon and present to everyone who can read, a tract, a gospel tract. And they distribute 100,000 tracts in 2 years, 1836, 1837, in Rangoon. And Judson would say, when I go on my morning walk, I can hand out 40 to 50 tracts only to people who request them. I mean, they were not forcing them down everybody's throat as they got off the subway. It was only to those who request them, only to those who could read. It's expensive to print all this stuff. And so there's some successes happening after this deep time of discouragement. The other thing that's significant is in that time of discouragement and depression, Judson never gives up his translation work. Now he's discouraged, he's blue, he's not making any public appearances, he's not going to any social occasions. And this guy, Archibald Campbell, who's got his British forces stationed right here, wants Judson at everything to show him off as arm candy. But Judson won't go. He doesn't want any accolade. During that time of discouragement and depression, he continues to work translating the Bible. Significant things start to happen about 1840. The British abolished slavery. The British abolished slavery. Remember when we started this conversation, we talked about labor being done by slaves and children. The British abolished slavery. Well, what does that mean? That means in this section, Arakan section and Tenasserim section, slavery is now abolished. But in that same document, when they abolished slavery, they also welcome missionaries. Now again, remember, the opponent of the mission movement was the British East India Company. who did not want missionaries in there, giving these people false ideas of equality and toleration. They make terrible workers whenever they get those ideas. 1840 is significant. He finishes translating the Bible, and he finishes it really in 1834. Let me get my number straight. He finishes it in 1834, and in 1840 it's published. And so this is the first edition, well actually this is the second edition of the full Bible in Burmese that Adoniram Judson has now translated. You remember how we talked about the struggle in trying to even identify the language in those earliest days. And this is one of the treasures of the university. The Old and New Testaments, published in, what does it say, 1840? 1840. Second edition, 5,000 copies of it. Now that's a pretty fat book, yes, but he's done it, all of that. Now again, he's doing it from the original languages. He did the Old Testament from Hebrew. He did the New Testament from Greek. He didn't do it from English into Burmese. He did it from Greek into Burmese, from Hebrew into Burmese. Do you want to read us something? Yeah. I'm sure. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son. You got that? Mm-hmm. All right, good. Now, I need to get these dates straight. 1834, he finishes the translation, but he revises it and doesn't publish it till 1840. We're talking about success times. 1834, January, he finishes that translation. 1834, April, he marries Sarah Boardman. He's been a widow for 8 years, but he marries Sarah Boardman. You know Boardman? George Boardman's widow. He marries Sarah Boardman. This is a wonderful woman, significantly different from Anne. Now, Anne was the aggressor. Anne is the one that would go confront the authorities. Sarah wanted to be a mom. Sarah wanted to make a home. Sarah wanted to bake cookies. Sarah wanted to learn to knit. You got me? Those kinds of things. And so he's now got a different environment in which he is nurtured with a spouse that has a nurturing personality. So from 1834 to 1845, we're going to fast forward now to 1845. He's married to Sarah for 11 years and takes his first furlough. So 1845, he now decides to come home to America. And there's a full set of missionaries there. There's probably about 16 missionaries. He can leave the place to them. He's coming back to America for the first time. Remember, he left in 1812. He got to Burma in 1813. And now he's going to go back for the first time. And so he and Sarah start back to the Boston area. Sarah dies on the way back. Sarah is buried on St. Helens Island. So we lose Sarah now, wife number 2. She had 8 children by Adoniram Judson. Again, 3 of those died. 5 of them made it to adulthood. When he gets back to America, 1845, for his sabbatical or for his deputation time or his furlough, he's greeted like a rock star. And he doesn't understand that. What has happened, the press in America has had an arms race about who could print the most material about Adoniram Judson. He's been in Burma since 1813. He doesn't read the Boston Globe anymore. And he didn't realize what a significant person he had become in America. He wasn't living in America. So when he got back here, the whole environment was a surprise to him. The Baptists were having a struggle over whether to appoint slave-holding missionaries. 1845, what's the struggle in America? It's slavery. And so that battle is going on. Are we going to appoint slave-holding missionaries? And the board eventually decides, no, we're not. That's not going to be what we perpetrate. His second wife is dead. He's a rock star. He can't speak loudly. Now again, they had very poor microphones in 1840. They had none, okay. And so the only way you were heard was by projecting to the back row and speaking to those people in the back row like they teach you in communication classes. He couldn't do that. He had one of these tropical maladies in his throat, and he couldn't speak. So oftentimes when he would speak, he would stand there. He has written out his text. He's got I even say a translator. He's got a voice standing there who's reading the text. Judson's whispering it, and this guy's reading the text and projecting it to the back row. And of all things, on this trip back, he meets a woman by the name of Emily Chubbuck. Now, she also goes by Fanny Forrester. Fanny Forrester is her writing name. She's an artist. She's a writer. She's a creative person, and she has to have a pen name because, number one, she's a woman, and number two, she's a writer, and number two, she's writing fiction, and so she writes under the pen name Fanny Forrester, though her birth certificate name is Emily Chubbuck. And he asked her to marry him and write the story of his first two wives. Isn't that romantic? Would you marry me and write the story of my first two wives? Now, this is probably the most significant female writer in the United States in the 1840s. Whenever you're reading Harper's, or when you're reading any of those main literary magazines, you will see Walt Whitman and Fanny Forrester in the table of contents. You'll see Edgar Allan Poe and Fanny Forrester in the table of contents. She's writing in that caliber. He asked her to marry him. She is 29, he is 58. Does that start rumors? So that grinds out, oh, he's marrying a woman half his age. But she says yes. 1846, he marries Emily Chubbuck, and they go back to Burma. Now, he's going to die here in just a few years, and 4 years, and we will finish that story here in our next little session. But through let's say 1830 to about 1850, we've got successes that are happening. We're figuring out how to do missions. We've got the language conquered. We can now communicate with people in their own terminology. We dress like they dress. We eat what they dress. We eat what they eat. We live like they live, and become indigenous in the work that we do. And let's have another little conversation here in a little bit. Then let's talk about the significance of the modern mission movement and a summary of the life of Adoniram Judson.